This is a production of SDPB.
Welcome to the Separation of Powers Town Hall at the South Dakota Capitol Rotunda in Pierre. I'm Kara Hetland, Director of Journalism at South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
And I'm Carson Walker, CEO of South Dakota Newswatch. Rarely have we as a country gone through so much rapid change in media and government. We have access to more information than ever before, but at the same time, many people are tuning out the news and not voting, as evidenced by recent elections that recorded single-digit turnout at some polling places.
There's also a lot of misunderstanding about how the government operates, and the goal of this program is not to engage in a debate about politics or the trustworthiness of the media. Instead, you'll hear firsthand from members of each branch of South Dakota state government on how the separation of powers and the system of checks and balances work in this state.
The roots of that concept stem from the founders of our nation wanting to make sure that no one branch of government had too much power. Each of them, the executive, legislative, and judicial arms, is intended to keep the others in check. That concept carries down to the state level and in some local governments as well.
In South Dakota, the governor and lieutenant governor are elected to lead the executive branch. The governor proposes a budget each year, but the legislature has to approve it. The legislature is composed of 105 lawmakers from 35 districts across the state. Each district has one senator and 2 representatives who are also elected. The judicial branch in South Dakota is called the Unified Judicial System. It includes 7 circuit courts around the state and the state Supreme Court in Pierre that has 5 justices who are all appointed by the governor, and they handle all appeals. Those formal separation of powers were part of the U.S. Constitution from the start. And in 1791, Congress passed the First Amendment that guaranteed additional rights to ensure that all Americans were free to criticize the government without fear of retribution. Besides freedom of the press and speech, the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights gives every American the right to practice the religion they choose and to assemble and petition the government.
Freedom of the press is explicitly written into the Constitution. The role of the media as a watchdog has evolved over time. The press and the media in the United States are effectively viewed as the fourth estate. The idea is that their role is to provide another check on all 3 branches of government by independently reporting on the actions of each branch, by asking questions and playing a watchdog role.
Now there's an emerging shift in what's considered journalism, and with the rising influence of bloggers, podcasters, and social media influencers, some may say there is the formation of the fifth estate. We saw it last year in the presidential election, and some of those communicators now have White House credentials that not too long ago were only given to traditional media.
Before we get into the town hall, it's a good time to walk through the basic civic duties and responsibilities of being an American. Those include the obvious, like obeying laws, paying taxes, and serving on a jury when called, but they also include being informed. The easiest way to do that is to pick a few different credible news sites at the local, state, and national level.
And those duties and responsibilities also include voting in elections and even running for office or supporting a candidate. In short, getting involved in government, which is why we're here tonight. And our hope with this program is to demystify how the branches of state government work and encourage more South Dakotans to realize they do have a voice in determining what happens in Pierre.
A couple suggestions on how to get the most out of this program. First, text in your questions. The moderators will get the conversation started, but we want to hear from you. Second, watch with an open mind. This is a nonpartisan program intended to discuss the structure of government and the role that civics plays in it. Thank you for joining.
Good evening. Tonight's Separation of Powers panel is broadcasting live from the rotunda of the South Dakota State Capitol building in Pierre. I'm SDPB's Jackie Hendry, joined by Kevin Kilo from South Dakota Newswatch, and we'll be your moderators this evening. We're joined by a panel of leaders from our state's 3 branches of government. First, the executive branch. Governor Larry Roden is South Dakota's 34th governor. He's a Republican from Union Center, where he has ranched all his life. He served nearly 2 decades in the legislature before being elected lieutenant governor in 2018 and re-elected in 2022 alongside former Governor Kristi Noem. He became governor in January.
Lieutenant Governor Tony Venhuizen represented House District 13 in Sioux Falls area from 2023 to 2025 as Republican. He was chief of staff to former governors Dennis Daugaard and Kristi Noem from 2014 to 2021. He is also author of the book The Governors of South Dakota, and the produces a podcast called Running Mates.
Representing the judicial branch, Supreme Court Chief Justice Stephen Jensen represents the 4th District. He entered private law practice in 1989. He was appointed to the First Judicial Circuit in 2003 and became presiding judge in 2011. Former Governor Dennis Daugaard appointed Jensen to the Supreme Court in 2017. In 2021 and again in January, he was selected Chief Justice.
Justice Patricia Devaney began practicing law as an assistant attorney general from 1993 to 2012 in the appellate division. She later moved to the litigation division, where she spent 17 years as a trial lawyer. She was appointed as the 6th Judicial Circuit Judge in 2012. Former Governor Kristi Noem appointed her to the Supreme Court 3rd District in 2019.
And we also have legislative leaders from both chambers and both parties with us tonight. First, Republican House Majority Leader Representative Scott Odenbach has practiced law in Spearfish since 2006 and specializes in business, estate, and real estate property law. He's also the managing broker for a real estate firm. Odenbach was elected to represent Legislative District 31 in 2020 and serves on the Education and Judiciary Committees.
Republican Senator Assistant Majority Leader Senator Carl Perry of Aberdeen was elected to District 3 last year. He previously served in the State House District 3 from 2019 until this year. Before retiring from the private sector in 2013, Perry worked in management for Philip Morris, Wells Fargo, and Pitney Bowes.
Democratic Representative Eric Muckey of Sioux Falls was elected to District 15 just last year. In the upcoming session, he will serve on the House Committee on Appropriations. He's the advisor and co-founder of Lost and Found, a Sioux Falls-based nonprofit providing services to prevent suicide and support those who have lost someone to it.
Democratic Assistant Minority Leader Senator Jamie Smith was elected to District 15 last year after previously serving in the House, including 4 years as Minority Leader. In 2022, he was the Democratic nominee for the election for governor against Kristi Noem. Smith is a real estate agent and is running for Sioux Falls mayor.
So tonight's discussion is meant to be of service to you, the viewers. So one more reminder, don't forget you can text your questions to us at the number you see on your screen. But before that, we'll get started with the basics. Each guest will share their perspectives of how their branch in the government functions. So why don't we start with the executive branch and Governor Roden. Why don't you share your perspective of the executive branch with us?
Yeah, well, thank you for having us on. It's a pleasure to be with you all. It's been interesting for me. I served 16 years in the legislature, and prior to that on a number of boards and commissions and school board. And to go from that to lieutenant governor for 6 years and now as governor, it's given me a pretty clear perspective, I think, as far as the separate functions of government, especially the legislative branch and the executive branch. Although I became pretty close friends with Dave Gilbertson, former Chief Justice, and spent a lot of time with him just talking in his office just down the hall here. And I think it gave me a pretty rounded perspective. The executive branch, it's interesting taking the role as governor after being in the legislature for so long, because then you understand, it gives you a clearer focus about why we formed government the way we did, with the separate powers and the separate list of responsibilities. And I will say this, because I think it's important for viewers to understand, in those 20-some years, I've traveled the United States and been on a number of different legislative panels, and then lieutenant governor, now as governor. And so I've talked to a lot of public officials from other states. We do a lot of things right that we don't realize we do in South Dakota, and we do it very well. And a lot of it has to do with our structure of government and the separation of powers. But understand, one of the key components, and now I'm drifting into the legislative side, but we have a citizens legislature. And I think it's a key component, because I have bragged on it thousands of times, that our legislators come do the work, and some things, most things they get right. The things they don't get right, they're here for 40 days, they go home and live with the laws that they passed for the rest of the year, and then they come back and fix what they didn't get right. They either fix it or they change it. The executive branch, totally different. Obviously, the legislative branch makes the laws, we execute the laws in the executive branch and enforce the laws. But along with that, heavy responsibilities as far as the responsibilities of running the function of state government on a year-long basis. And obviously, the governor's office presents a budget. So constitutionally, there's a lot of authority vested in the executive branch. But as I've talked to legislators in my position and given my perspective, a strong legislative branch makes for a stronger executive branch and vice versa. And so I think that's what gets lost sometimes in the politics of it, that we have a very distinct role, and for the most part, we abide by them very well. And I think even the governor's office in South Dakota has more limit in power than governors in other states do. And that's a good thing. And I think part of the reasons that I've said many times that South Dakota is the freest state in a nation founded on the principles of freedom. And I think a lot of it has to do with the view we take on how to govern.
Lieutenant Governor, you have experience with the executive branch from the Chief of Staff side of things. You have experience with the legislature, and now you're in your position as Lieutenant Governor. What would you add to the governor's perspective on this branch?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having us here tonight. I thought the governor gave a very complete answer to that question. Maybe one thing I would add, and again, as you said, I spent a long time working in the governor's office on the staff, including his chief of staff, and dealt with the legislature very closely in that role, then moved up a floor and served in the state house, and now back in the executive branch as lieutenant governor. The only thing I would add from that experience is, in South Dakota, our state government is still pretty pragmatic and, I would say, informal. And the branches work closely together, and we are focused on solving problems. This is not like when you watch Washington, D.C., where they're at the opposite ends of Pennsylvania Avenue holding dueling press conferences or something. I mean, if we have a problem, we can walk up the stairs and go talk to these guys, or they can walk down here and talk to us. And most of the time, we're able to find a pathway forward that's the best for everyone. So I think that's a function, as the governor said, of us having a citizen legislature and also having an executive branch that is very accessible and close to the people. But I think we can be proud that we're pretty focused on just doing the right thing.
And for the legislators, what is your role in government? How does it, what are its duties, and how does it fit into government here?
Well, thank you. I'll start. Thanks, guys, and thanks PBS for having this. I think this is great, and fostering civic engagement, as the Lieutenant Governor knows, we've worked together on that for 5 years now, has been a particular interest of mine. So hopefully high school kids or others will maybe watch this in the future. So I think they said it very well. I think the fact that we have a citizen legislature serves us well. There's 70 people in the House, 35 in the Senate, come from all walks of life. The thing that strikes me is just all the varying perspectives. And the founders set it up that way. You have to try to find consensus. You've got to have the votes, as they say. So we make the laws, the executive branch enforces the laws and executes the laws, and our good justices tell us all what the law really says. So it's finding that consensus, and it is, as was said before, it's informal here. People have mentioned to me that are from other states, and I have some experience in other states, down in Florida and stuff years ago, but it is more informal here. People can come to Pierre, they can come and talk to us. Every bill gets a hearing, and that's just, it's a good thing. It's the way South Dakota works.
I'm going to continue on a little bit and just give you a different perspective. And we're a citizen-led legislature, which means that we have people that are attorneys, doctors, farmers, ranchers, whatever. And so we get a wide variety of people who have a wide variety of ideas. We work for 38 days. We're paid for 38 days, and we actually, some of us work 238 days. We got to work with executive to kind of change that. But I've been at this for 7 years, and what I would do is, this is a civics lesson also today. I would say pay attention in school. Make sure that you learn as much as you can. Listen to the League of Women Voters. They're a nonpartisan group. And sometimes people say, well, they're partisan in my area, but they're a nonpartisan group that are trying to get things done. And I've been in Washington, D.C. on several occasions, but in South Dakota, you can get things done and make things happen. I've worked on a lot of different committees, but the South Dakota Public Broadcasting has done some great things. This is a great opportunity for all of us. We have an opportunity to make a difference. We can really make a difference. When someone needs something, they come to us. And how does a bill become a law in South Dakota? They start off with an idea, and they share that idea with Eric, or they share that idea with Jamie, or they share that idea with Scott or myself, or they share it with one of the other legislators. Then after we get that idea, we share it with the Legislative Research Council. We find out if other states have that idea, if other legislators have that idea, and then we move forward and we try to get something that makes sense. And we move that bill forward to represent our people, and it goes to a legislative committee. And then the legislative committee, and there are lots of different committees. I've worked on several. We don't get to listen to everything, but the committees I've been on are Health and Human Services, State Affairs, Legislative Procedures, Commerce and Energy, Taxation, Retirement Laws. And as long as we keep thinking the right things, which is under God the people rule, and we do the right things, we're going to get things accomplished. And the final thing I'll say is, I promised people when I started into this business, I said, I promise to listen to you. And I'm going to listen to all sides of issues. I'm not just going to make a decision because it's a Republican issue or because you're a Democrat. I'm not going to be for it. I'm going to listen to what's said, all sides. Then I'm going to make a decision that's the best thing for our constituents and for the state of South Dakota. And that's all I'll say for now.
Good evening, and thanks for having us. A couple functions of the legislature that I think are really important to highlight, and I think Senator Perry gave a great overview, and I think it's important to highlight something for folks listening to what Representative Odenbach said, which is ultimately the legislature has the power to make law, but one of the most important laws, and maybe the main law that we are really focused on, is the budget for the state of South Dakota. The legislature has the power of the purse and the ability to decide, how do we fund our government, how do we set the revenue target every year, and what are we applying our funds for in terms of priorities and policy. And so that's probably one of the most important functions of our legislature and something to keep in mind. But I know for our caucus in particular, I'm also part of something very unique in state government that a lot of folks may not actively pay attention to in the legislature, which is the Interim Rules Review Committee. There's a function of the executive branch where they can also look at our law and look at administrative law and set policy. Our job as legislators that are serving in that Rules Review Committee is to set the precedent of, did this follow the intent of the legislature and the laws that we passed during session? And if it hasn't, do we allow that rule to move forward? And so it's another interesting part of the executive and legislative branch that I don't know that a lot of people hear about, which is the executive branch has some ability to create law in a sense. And it's our job to then look at that and say, are we providing that check and balance in that process too? And so I hope folks come away with a good understanding from the legislature that, you know, for a group of folks who meet for 38 days, there's a lot of roles and responsibilities we have, not just during that time, but then outside of session too.
Thank you, and thanks for having us here tonight, and thanks for anybody that's tuning in. It's a timely time to have this conversation. And one of the things we do well here in South Dakota, and the governor spoke about it earlier, was the fact that we are a citizen legislature. We come together to do things, but we have relationships with each other, and we can have conversations with one another. People around the country don't necessarily know that, and I think people will, a lot of times will watch whatever channel they watch on TV and think that that's the way that government functions here in the state of South Dakota as well. And I'm one that, as the assistant minority leader, would be hypercritical to watch and make sure that's not going on. And I can tell South Dakotans that we actually do have open lines of communication here in the Capitol. I can walk and talk to the governor, and he'll take my call. He'll talk to me. The lieutenant governor will. So will the leader of the majority party. We'll sit down and we'll talk about it, and because that's so important. Dialogue is something that we need to have. And I've worked for years being in government that we need to have civility in government. And I can tell you honestly that we do have that here in South Dakota. And that's something I'm really proud of as I travel around the country and talk to people. I wouldn't want to be a part of this. And when we talk about civics and getting involved and all of the things we can do, I think the number one thing we can do is do things in a way that people want to be a part of it. And I think we do that here in South Dakota. I love the fact that we have pages come in and our interns that come in and get to see how we do government here, because lots of them turn around and become something else in government, our lieutenant governor being one of them. That is where he got his start, and he's here today as our lieutenant governor. And I think he found a bride through that process as well. But, you know, I start every day that I work in the legislature under one premise, and that is that we all love our kids, we all love our families, and we all love our parents, no matter what side of the aisle we're on. So you can't argue in those ways. We have to understand that that's where we're starting. And when we start there, then we can move forward and try to get to an answer that makes sense for all of us.
Thank you. We'll wrap up this first round of introductions with the judicial branch, obviously unique compared to the executive and legislative branch. Chief Justice, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, and I will echo the others. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about our South Dakota governmental system and what we do, particularly in the court system. So I would tell you, and I guess I would break it down to three things that we really do in the court system. First and foremost, we provide a fair and impartial forum for the resolution of disputes involving civil, criminal cases, juvenile cases. We have about 200,000 cases a year filed in the courts in South Dakota, and we're responsible to decide those cases fairly, impartially, and make sure that the rule of law is applied consistently and fairly to everyone that comes into the court system. So that's really our first and foremost and primary role as a court, is to peacefully resolve disputes. You know, we don't go out and have duels when there's a dispute in a civilized society. We've resolved those through the courts, and it works well. The second thing that we're responsible for in the court system is for probation. And if you've heard that term, what that means is that as a court system, we're responsible to supervise people that come through the courts and are convicted of a felony offense and are not sent to the penitentiary, but are placed on probation. And so we have court services officers who supervise those individuals. Our treatment courts, or what are often referred to as drug courts, are a part of that probation process in some instances for those individuals that are addicted to drug or alcohol or other substances and mental health issues. And so that probation component is very important. At any one time, we have about 8,000 people on probation through our court system. And the third thing we do, and that's really the Supreme Court is responsible for regulating the legal system in South Dakota. And so that means licensing of attorneys, discipline of attorneys, establishing the rules of procedure within the court system. So we make sure that everyone has a fair opportunity to come in and present their cases. So those are really the three primary functions. There's a lot to that. Maybe I'll pass it over to Justice Devaney and let her talk a little bit.
Good evening. I also was one of the people on the panel here that started as a page in the legislature many years ago when I was in high school, and I loved government then, and that kind of fit in with my interests generally. I ended up working with the executive branch for 19 years and have now been with the judiciary almost that long, not quite. But I hope people, I appreciate the opportunity also to talk more about what we do. But judging is not easy. And we are presented, and one thing people sometimes don't understand completely is that we are a reactionary branch of government. We decide the cases that are brought to us. And we work really hard, and our job is to try to do the very best we can to apply the law to the facts and the issues that are brought before us. And oftentimes that is not an easy task. Many times we get issues that come before us that are extremely complicated, that have very well-reasoned arguments on one or more sides of the issue. And we are tasked with trying to do our very best to sort through that and to do it impartially and not based on any type of other affiliation other than looking at what are the facts before us. Unfortunately, I think now especially we see a lot where I think judges unfairly get placed in a category that we are not. We are not political figures. We are tasked with upholding the laws that have been enacted by the legislative branch, the policies that have been established by the executive branch. And where it kind of works together is that we are that check, and it is our obligation when there are cases or issues brought before us where we have to examine the actions of the other branches, and we do our best to try to discern what the intent is. And so often we have cases, I bet every term we have more than multiple cases where you'll see in the opinions that we write where we are trying to ascertain what did the legislature intend when they passed this law. Sometimes that's easy, sometimes it's not, and sometimes the reason it's not is because there are unique factual situations that come up that you did not contemplate, and so we have to discern and do the best that we can to try to figure that out. When I worked in the executive branch, and I worked with the Attorney General's office for several years, and there were some occasions where I worked with groups where there was legislation that was being proposed, and I was part of that process trying to figure out, painstakingly going through drafts, and I have a great appreciation for what the legislature does after having been through that process, because you think you have covered the thought of all of the scenarios that might come to play when you're enacting a law, and then something comes out of the blue and it just doesn't fit. Or sometimes something is enacted, or maybe there's an executive policy which conflict. And there's more than one set of rules, and we have to figure out which one controls. So those are the things and kind of how the intricacies of how it works together. But I think, it's really key, and I do think we're fortunate in South Dakota that we have members of each branch that respect what the other does. And the more that we can have that understanding and appreciation, I think the system just works better.
We've received already a handful of questions from our live audience. I'll do my best to, we'll do our best to kind of direct to who we think these might be directed to. But of course, this is intended as a conversation, so just try to get our attention and we'll direct traffic as much as we can. I believe this one seems to be more directed towards our legislators. Our first viewer question: do the people of South Dakota have the right to instruct their representatives? Sounds like a direct democracy question, or how much the influence of the folks you represent has on your decision-making in office. Which of our lawmakers would like to field that one first?
Thanks so much, guys. They're all pointing at me. Do the people of South Dakota have the right to instruct their representatives? Was that the question? Did I say that right?
You are right, yes.
You know, as I said, there's 70 members of the House, there's 35 members of the Senate, and our job, I guess, in a representative republic is to synthesize the collective will of the people of South Dakota. Ben Franklin famously said, "A republic if you can keep it," when asked what kind of government they'd started. And I correct people all the time who talk about our democracy, because there's a difference between a pure democracy and a constitutional republic, and we have the latter. And so certainly we are to be instructed by the people we represent. We have a representative form of government. We need to listen to them. We need to be active in our communities and our districts. And then at a certain point, they send us here to Pierre to do the job and represent them.
Working together, we all have different separate powers. The judicial has a power, the executive has a power, the legislative has a power. The most important power that I think we have is the ability to listen, the ability for concern. And I believe that you said the word that really struck me, and that's discern. We're able to discern what is important and what is critical. And I was talking to one of the legislators earlier. I have a person that has a need, but you know, it is important that you take care of each one of those needs. I had a paraplegic last year that wanted to hunt. Well, he couldn't hunt because he had a motorized vehicle, and that's his wheelchair. And but we were able to work through that, and we were able to take care of his problems. We need to listen, and when we listen, we can take care of things. And it's not that we're the greatest people in the world, it's that we really do care about what the constituency wants. And it's not just me. I know Eric, and I know Jamie, and I know Scott all do the same thing. When somebody brings something to them, they're going to do the best job they can to represent them. And if it isn't going to work, we tell them why it isn't going to work. But we're going to have empathy toward them, and we're going to work with them. That's what I think we do.
The right to instruct is an interesting term for a number of reasons, and I think Representative Odenbach covered well the fact that we are a representative democracy, a constitutional republic in the words. Ultimately, the voice of the voters has decision and sway over what we do in our case. You know, if we are elected and the voters send us back, or the voters decide to not send us back, it does send a message of how they may instruct. I do see another side of this too when you do talk about instructing your legislators. One of the things that makes our particular brand of state level government unique is that we certainly have a constitutional republic in the nature of our representative democracy, House of Representatives and Senate. But we do have a large number of measures that are direct democracy in the form of citizen-initiated measures, referendums, and constitutional amendments. And in a sense, that's one way that the voters or the citizens of South Dakota can actually instruct the legislature and instruct state government. We are the first state in the nation to have that citizen-initiated measure. And so it's one part of our form of government that I think is very unique for all of us to contemplate is we are a constitutional republic in the legislative sense, but citizen legislation, the direct ability to influence, does have a direct democracy effect. And so, as with many things in the United States, there's a mix of everything and a melding of a lot of things. And so in a sense, the voters can instruct us in one way, but on the other hand, they may not.
Okay, this next question I think is one directed at both the executive and the legislative branches. Many local media outlets have consolidated, laid off staff, gone out of business, especially in the last few years. What concerns do you have about the impact on transparency, open government, and civic engagement in South Dakota of this process? Why don't we start with you, Governor?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. I couldn't understand the first part of the question.
Many local media outlets have consolidated, laid off staff. Newspapers are basically closing in our local communities. And what impact does that have on open government, on transparency, and civic engagement?
Well, it's an interesting conundrum because, you know, it's kind of a sign of the times, you know, with social media and so many people getting their news online. Certainly, I've been kind of impressed in one way because we've seen examples of where these newspapers have thrived, and even recently. I don't know where that all ends up. I think technology will continue to drive that discussion as far as how it plays out. But as far as openness in government, as I was in the legislature and for the last since 2000, and to see how technology has progressed, I kind of smile sometimes when people make accusations that we're trying to keep stuff undercover and trying to not be open. Never in the history of the state has there been more access and more information, more openness in government, and it's because of technology. Every committee hearing is televised and recorded, and I can go back 20 years and listen to testimony and I do this fairly often. Something just strikes me, and I go back and listen to testimony I gave 20 years ago on bills. And I think we will continue to do that. We continue to upgrade our technology, and PBS has been a big part of that as far as televising more and more. And you know better than me how much you've stepped up and how much you televise and how much information you garner during the legislative session and put that out. So openness in government and transparency has been, I talked about that in my inaugural address 7 months ago, and so yes, it will continue to be an important issue for us, and we'll continue to do what we can to keep our citizens as connected and informed as any state in the nation.
Senator Smith.
Thank you, and it is a good question. It is a concern. You know, when we look at the consolidation of papers or the elimination of papers and what has happened with that traditional print media, one thing, and it was alluded to by the governor, but there have been some just local South Dakotan reporters that have stepped up in a very big way and actually been successful, and I'm so glad they have, and I'm not going to name them by names, but I am so thankful for those folks that have stepped into that void and said, we are going to make sure this continues. And so I am thankful that there are people willing to step in and do that with different media outlets that are stepping up, because it is an important part of the process. It is important to have people that understand the history and what's going on to be able to help tell the story, the whole story, and understand. I also appreciate those reporters that follow things for a long time and dig. I also think that as leaders here in our state, because of the citizen legislature that we do have, I know I do at least, and I know that my friends in the legislature try to make ourselves very available when asked to comment on something and do that. I don't try to dodge it. I try to go in and have a conversation about it, because I think the people deserve that. The people deserve to know what we're thinking.
Senator Perry.
Well, whenever I see something that's bad, I also say, okay, what's good out of this? And, you know, we lost a paper over in the Watertown area. Now we have the Watertown Current. We lost a paper in Aberdeen. basically shut down. And now we have the Aberdeen Insider. We lost something down by Sioux Falls, and we have Dakota Scout. So there are people that are tying up their bootstraps and making things happen, and it's really good. There's so many ways, there's so many different radio stations, there's so many different ways to get the news out. There's Facebook and all kinds of things. It's pretty exciting. There's also a downside to that. There might be too much going out.
Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, you know, I would just build on what the last couple said. You know, it's interesting as you look at the evolution of the media over time. The traditional media in the main they're private businesses. And so they fill an important role in civic engagement, an important part of civic life in big towns, little towns throughout the state. But they're private businesses, and so like any private business, they come and they go, and the realities of the economic realities can change. Public broadcasting is an exception to that, of course. It's not a private business, but what I've noticed over the 15 years or so that I've been in different roles here at the Capitol, there's actually more reporters covering the legislature today than there were, say, 10 years ago. And that is despite the fact that some of the longstanding media organizations that used to cover the Capitol have declined somewhat. But as Senator Perry was saying, we've seen, new entities and some innovation, and we have new for-profit entities. We have a couple new nonprofit news entities stepping into the fore. I think public broadcasting has more reporters at the legislature than they did at one time. So you see these things kind of adjust. Frankly, I think a big concern is in some of the smaller, more rural areas of the state where these the little newspapers, maybe weekly newspapers, are again private businesses, and the only source of information about what's going on in the community. Representative Mucky and I are both from Douglas County, which is a county of 2,500 people. He's from Corsica and I'm from Armour, so we're huge rivals. But we shared a newspaper other than the front page was different. That's how we differentiated. They're struggling to get by, and as those little papers go away, and we just had a scare here a couple months ago where 4 not even that small newspapers for South Dakota that very nearly did shut down and then kind of got picked up back up. What are these towns supposed to do? Where do the public notices go? How do you know what the city council is doing? That's a real problem, and I don't know that there's really been an economically viable answer that's been identified for that.
I'll add one more thing to this, and that's during the session, we have a press release every week on Thursday if the week ends on Thursday, Friday if it ends on Friday, and we invite all the different public service announcement type people there. They can ask us any questions they want, and if they're really hard questions, we give them to Scott, and if they're really easy questions, then I go ahead and answer them. And the other thing that we do is we do Cracker Barrels and legislative briefings. We go out and see people as much as we can. And your one question about can a person make a difference in when they give us information, I can tell you that my wife came to me and said, you guys, if you shut off South Dakota public broadcasting, I'm going to be very disappointed. I said, okay, your constituent I'm going to listen to.
I'll withhold comment on your wife's advice on that particular matter. This next viewer question is directed towards the judicial branch. In rural South Dakota, there are many state's attorneys serving multiple counties and continually running unopposed, likely due to lack of attorneys in rural areas. The separation of powers serves as checks and balances. How do we keep state's attorneys in check if there is no competition for state's attorneys in rural areas?
Well, of course, state's attorneys are elected by the local public, but that is an issue in a number of rural counties. We have, I think, 5 counties across the state that have no attorneys. We probably have another dozen counties that maybe have 3 or less attorneys. And so it is a real problem in rural communities. And, state's attorneys, oftentimes they'll have a state's attorney who will maybe not live in the county, but they serve in that county because they need to have a state's attorney in that role. The difficulty these days is it's hard to get attorneys to move to rural communities, and we've done a couple of things as a court system to try to incentivize that. One of the things that Chief Justice Gilbertson did when he was still with the court system was to create the Rural Practice Program, which is to essentially reimburse tuition over a course of 5 years if you will serve in a small town, small county. We have probably about 15, 20 lawyers right now that have been placed in those rural communities. That's one of the things we've done. We're working on bar licensing to encourage lawyers to go into rural communities and provide an alternative pathway to licensure. So those are some of the things we're doing, but the reality of it is, and you know, rural attorneys can be very successful. There's lots of work to do out there, but you know, because of maybe spouses or just because they don't want to live in a small town, it's hard to get lawyers to go there. We don't have a lot of ability to do that other than try to incentivize as much as we can, and we're constantly thinking about that. Nationwide, it's an issue. They talk about the term that's come out, and Chief Justice Gilbertson was very innovative in that now they use the term rural deserts when they talk legal deserts, and he was talking about this 10 years ago, so he was way ahead of the curve on that, but there's still a lot of work to do on it.
This next question is, anyone responsible to verify that a bill is constitutional before it is presented to the people for a vote? As Justice Devaney said, the judiciary is reactive, so I think we'll start with the legislature on this one.
I'm sorry, but that's a tough question, Scott.
Well, I think that maybe the executive and our judicial branch friends might be the best at answering that, how that process works, I guess, when you have, I think you were talking in the context of an initiated measure, perhaps, and then whether or not it's deeming it constitutional or not before it goes to the voters themselves. So maybe they'd like to address that.
Yeah. The viewers didn't specify the measure, but I'll toss this to the executive branch.
Yeah, thank you. I think the way they asked the question, they're talking about a measure being presented to the people. So I think they're asking about an initiated measure. We have a process to make sure that an initiated measure complies with the standards to present a measure, that you have to have so many signatures and so forth, and that is the job of the Secretary of State. In addition, there is a requirement that the language be vetted through the Legislative Research Council, which is the legislative staff that reviews all the bills that legislators introduce. And they can offer comments. They can offer comments about, well, you should write it this way, not that way. There should be 2 sections, not 1 section. And they can say your bill is unconstitutional. The sponsor of the measure does not have to take their advice. They don't have to listen. They can take their advice or not. They can take it or leave it. So, yeah, you can collect the signatures and put an initiated measure on the ballot that is arguably unconstitutional, and if it passes, then somebody can go to court and file an injunction, and then it'll wind up with our friends over here, and they'll have the final word on if it's enforceable or not.
Senator Perry.
And that is why we have checks and balances defined by our South Dakota Constitution. It's not, what do I think? But actually, the truth is, if I just say, Tony, what do you think? Then I pretty well got a good idea what I should think. So, you know, what we have to do is we have to rely on people and trust people. And there are people in our group that we can rely on and trust. And working together with separate powers, we don't have the power to do everything. But like a special session, we couldn't call a special session, but the executive can. You know, we can't appoint, you know, different people, but the executive can. In the budget process, they can't do the budget by themselves. they can present a budget, and the legislature is the one that puts the budget together and approves it. So there's so many times where we need to work together. This is not something where one group can do it on their own. And any group in this organization that thinks that they are the only ones, they will fail. And South Dakota has been very successful. We balance our budget every year. We may have hiccups, but we try not to do that in public. We try to make sure that if we have those hiccups, we do them privately.
Our next question is directed towards the executive branch. Especially during session, the executive and legislative branches often have to work together to get things done. Do you have any examples of that happening?
Well, many examples. I'm trying to think of a significant one, but literally every session. I can remember as a legislator, it was 16 years in the legislature. I think 14 of them I was in a leadership position, and I can't imagine one year that there are multiple times that I solicited help from the executive branch on stuff that was above my pay grade. And I think that's one of the things that South Dakota is unique on, is that relationship. And for me, when I gave my inaugural address, I tried to capitalize that policy, that if the legislators need help or they need resources, you know, I have I don't know how many cabinet secretaries, 20-some, about 20 cabinet secretaries, commissioners of all areas of state government. And I made it clear to the legislators that they were a resource that I would gladly lend to them for counsel on legislation. And conversely, when the legislature is in session, the executive branch, we're not sitting down eating bonbons. We're combing through every piece of legislation that goes in front of every committee every single day. And if we see problems with that legislation, we identify problems, we'll seek out the prime sponsor and identify the problems or the pitfalls, or hook them up with the resources that can give them counsel on how to fix it, or just general counsel.
Yeah, I would just add, in terms of, you know, the legislature and the executive branch working together to solve problems, I can think of many examples too. I'm hoping next week at this time I'll have one more. You know, the one I guess the story that I would share, because I was just thinking about the other day, was a former legislator who just died last week, whose name was Karin Solai, who was a Lutheran pastor from Sioux Falls, and just a little lady, you know, somebody who you might look over. She was a Democrat. She was here for, I think, 6 years. And this actually goes to the last question, too. In 2016, the voters had passed a measure that was intended to be kind of an ethics reform. Badly drafted, had a lot of problems with it. It was, after it passed, it was challenged in court and it was enjoined, and the judge said this is unconstitutional in a number of ways and we can't enforce it. So the legislature comes in that next year and repeals that law, but with the idea that we're going to try to take its key concepts and pass them back into law in workable ways. We're going to try to honor the will of the voters, even if the letter of what they passed had some problems. One of the aspects of that originally did not have a lot of support in the legislature among Republicans was the idea of an ethics commission. And there was just concern that that could be politicized or misused for political purposes. You've seen that happen in some other states. Representative Solai really felt that we needed to find a way to do that. And she was putting some concepts together. She came to my office. I was chief of staff at the time, and she was telling me why we needed to make this happen and we had to figure it out. And I said, well, Representative, you know, I've talked to the Attorney General about this, Marty Jackley, and he sees a lot of problems with this. I don't think he would support it. She said, nope, I already talked to him and he agrees with me. I said, well, I don't think the legislature will go for it either. I mean, nope, I went and talked to Speaker Mickelson, Mark Mickelson. He's all for it. Okay, I said, well, I'll get back to you. So I went to both of them, who had both told me they were opposed to this. And they said, yeah, you know, she came and talked to us, and she won us over. I was thinking, who is this lady? I mean, it's like Jedi mind tricks on these people. And I went, they both agreed, and I went and talked to the governor. It was Governor Dugard at the time, and he said, well, maybe we need to find a way to make this work. So we all sat down together. We put together, I think it was House Bill 1072, I think, creating the Government Accountability Board, which is set up in a way that you can file a complaint against an elected official if you think that they've done something wrong, but with protections in place to make sure that these aren't slanderous and they're not being misused and that there's some objectivity. It's retired judges who sit on that panel, so people who have some trust. And again, that was a Democratic representative in a very small minority, won over the executive branch and the Attorney General and the Speaker of the House and got that bill passed into law.
Well, this goes, what he was just saying reminded, I was thinking about that same piece of or that same bill in the previous question when we were talking about somebody being able to inform somebody that initiated measures unconstitutional. I was in the LRC, and the guy that did the review, the staffer, showed me his scratch pad and the notes that he had given back to them, and he had, in red ink, went through that. It was like a 30-page bill, 34 pages, I believe, and he'd went in red ink, pointed out, wrote notes, sidebars where it was unconstitutional or unworkable, and it was 34 pages of red marks on virtually every page where it was unconstitutional or unworkable. And he handed it back to them, and they didn't make one change. It was, by the way, an out-of-state organization that presented that.
I'd turn that same question to our lawmakers.
I think one thing that's maybe important for folks watching to really think about, when you talk about the dance between the executive branch and the legislative branch, besides apparently the pride of District 15, Carr and Soley, is the budget. You know, when we're getting into the budget conversation as a state, the governor produces the budget. We all arrive here for a budget address before we ever arrive in session. We have a sit down to be able to talk through, you know, what is the administration looking for? What are we trying to aim at? Obviously, the governor doesn't have the final say in that budget until the bill arrives at the desk. But that's probably the greatest example for the average South Dakotan to know about. When we talk about the collaboration between legislative and executive, that's really where the rubber meets the road. Every step of the way, you know, the amount of hours we spend in the Appropriations Committee figuring that piece out, there's still always a presence in some capacity, whether it's maybe not in the committee room, but somewhere along the line, legislative and executive branch have to be on the same page.
This next question, along the same vein of working together, can lawmakers speak to times they've worked in a bipartisan way to get things done?
For us in a super minority, there's absolutely nothing we can do without working in a bipartisan way. And one of the frustrations, but one of the things that has to happen for us is, in the minority, again, we can't do anything without making a friend. And so we oftentimes do that. And I mean, any bill that's passed by a Democrat, which happens every year, not as many as we'd like perhaps, but every year, that has been done in a bipartisan way. And if you also look at the bills brought by our friends across the aisle, and when I say friends, I mean it, friends, when they do that, if you look at the number of bills that come through our legislature that either go on the consent calendar, which means that they're voted on in committee, they had no opposition, they go on to a block of bills at the beginning of a day that we vote on and just say, yep, those are good, they're going to go to the governor's desk and he's going to get to sign those bills, or the bills that hear the floor. We agree. I don't know the percentage, but I'd garner to say it's 80% of the time probably. It's the other ones that, you know, catch catch the heat, and a lot of times it's not even on bipartisanship. It's within different groups of people that might be urban, it might be rural, it might be municipalities against co-ops. I mean, who knows what the division line is? But in order to do anything here, we have to work together. And in order to do anything that passes with money involved, it has to be done by getting together even a lot more, you know, at a 70% line. And so that by design makes us have to work together and try to do things that are good for all people in South Dakota.
I think a line that I've been enjoying as of late, if you're really going to have a good body politic, you have to have good policy to begin with, and you have to bring those things forward. I think a lot of the best policy or the most thorough policies that we pass out of the legislature have to have some level of bipartisanship, and the best ideas tend to come out that way. And I think of a really good example of a topic that, knowing we're talking about this in the evening, I won't dive into the details because I'll put you to sleep immediately, is unclaimed property. You know, when I think about this past session, the ability to work in a coalition of legislators that range from every ideological spectrum you can possibly imagine, plus the executive branch, multiple parts of the executive branch, I should say, coming together to say, this is clearly a solution that we're all trying to address, and we're trying to make sure we're putting in policy that says pieces of unclaimed property pass through a financial services sector to the state of South Dakota. That's not actually taxpayer dollars, it's actually property of individuals. We need to have the backup and the claims to make sure we can pay for those, but also be smart about how we address this so that we can actually pay for the operation of state government. And when you look at that story from this past session especially, I can say with certainty, because I know it's going to come to the voters here in 2 years, well, a year I guess, you're going to have support from every aisle, every part of each party looking at this saying, this is good for South Dakota, and the best policy tends to come out that way.
Governor.
Well, I'd just like to throw in, because, you know, anytime these questions come up about the legislature, 1,000 things go through my mind, but I remember as serving as majority leader in the House chambers, and I was at a conference and they were talking about working across the aisles, and we were talking to legislators come from states with a very close majority minority, you know, and I remember speaking up at that group and saying it's much easier to be nonpartisan or bipartisan and work across the aisle when you have to. It's more difficult in a state like South Dakota where the majority party has a supermajority. And I remember in caucus in the Republican caucus, reminding the members that every single one of the 70 seats in the chamber, regardless of which party they come from, represent 25,000 South Dakotans. So we owe them the respect to listen to what they have to say and give them due process, just like anyone else in the legislature. And I think that's what separates South Dakota. Another thing that I think makes us special is because I think we are a lot more civil in our process and a lot less political. Some of that's changed, it kind of ebbs and flows, but it's been a major pillar in my platform is to be civil and respectful in the process and peer. And I think South Dakota is led by example in a lot of ways, and I think that's one of them.
Our next viewer question, again for the judicial branch, another sort of pipeline to the bench question. What is the judicial branch doing to create a pathway for Native Americans to get into the legal profession?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any particular programs at this point in time that we're working on specifically. We certainly are wanting to encourage all groups to be involved in the judicial system. I think it's important when you stand in front of a judge for you to feel like the judge understands where you're coming from. And I will tell you that when I came onto the bench, we probably had 5 or 6 women on the trial bench in South Dakota. And there's been a lot of work done to change that over the years. I think we're about probably 50-50 right now, I would say, across the bench. A lot of that is due to how the selection process works. We don't have a lot of control over that. So just to give you a little sense of how that works for us, judges are selected, they go through an independent Judicial Qualifications Commission review. So there's a background check, there is a extensive application interview process. Any lawyer can apply. They go through that independent process. If they're nominated or selected, they're sent up to the governor, and then the governor selects the individual that will become the next judge. So we don't have a lot of control over that process. We certainly, and we'll get asked, for recommendations when the governor is making a selection. But I think that's one of the things that really sets us apart in South Dakota is our independence as a judiciary. And I'll just point out one story, and because I think this is really significant. Many people probably heard about the Wisconsin Supreme Court election in May of this year. $100 million was spent on that election. I mean, just think about that for a minute. $100 million. And in South Dakota, we don't have that. We've never had that. We have the independent selection process. So if I, as a lawyer, want to become a judge, I can't go to Governor Roden and say, Governor Roden, will you appoint me to be a judge? I have to go through that independent selection process before I even get a chance to interview with Governor Roden. And we've been very fortunate to have all of our governors, and Governor Roden, I think, has appointed 2 already since he's been in office, 2 judges. We've been very fortunate to have governors that take that process seriously and select who they believe to be the most a qualified person to serve in that position. And so we're not beholden to anyone. When we sit there, we're beholden to the law and not to, well, this person gave me $10 million to get elected to the Supreme Court. And so we are intentionally very independent, and that's one of the things that's good. As far as, the question on diversity, those are things that are going to come over time, but it does take time for that system to work through itself.
One thing, when you talked about a pathway, and there aren't any current impediments or blocks to that pathway, but one thing I think we have been trying to do more and more is outreach, particularly to the younger generation, and how you end up being on the bench as a judge usually starts with being a lawyer. And there are a lot of efforts that are being made both by our state bar association and the judicial system to continue to more often go to schools as a starting point. Whenever we go on the road with the court, twice a year we hold our court at a university. We go to the USD Law School, but we've been trying to also go to a different location every March. And when we go, we invite and hope we have lots of schools coming, and many of them do. And I know there's outreach going to where members of the judiciary have gone to schools to put on mock trials. And those include schools on the reservations, and to try to inspire anyone that is interested in going into this field to consider it, because that's where the pipeline has to start. And there are a lot of initiatives going on with our state bar right now to try to encourage people to consider a legal profession.
This is a general question for the panel. Are you concerned about the state of civics education in schools, as Sandra Day O'Connor was in the years after her retirement from the U.S. Supreme Court? And if so, what should or could be done about it?
Representative Odenbach.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I've been concerned, yes. I served on the school board in Spearfish for 3.5 years before I became a legislator. And one of the programs that I saw there was called We the People program, where we even had a program for 5th graders and also for high schoolers. I went to Washington, D.C. when my daughter was a senior. And the kids were given a chance to basically do a mock congressional hearing where they were taught how to give testimony, how to get up to speed on an issue and become an expert really on an issue and take questions in the Socratic method. And so it is important. We've had a wide-ranging discussion tonight, and the influence of technology and young people being on their phones so much and having all manner of entertainment at their fingertips makes it harder to have young people who spend time reading books and thinking deeply about a subject, including how our country should work and how they can be involved no matter what their major in college is, for example. Whatever it is, you can serve on a school board someday, you can be in the legislature someday. It's not just for people who are government majors or political science majors or whatever. So we've worked hard, and we stood up working with the Board of Regents, a Center for Civic Engagement at Black Hills State University this last year, and they've hired an executive director, and it's then branched out and ended up being an additional requirement for additional civics education at all of our universities. So I'm a huge proponent of, classes that I have called and talked to people about comparative political and economic systems. I took classes like that years ago when I was in college. Just show young people the facts about this country and compare our economic systems to all others and compare our political system to all others and our freedoms and what are the outcomes. And you don't have to proselytize, you can just show the facts. And if you do that in an honest manner, I think you'll raise up a generation of great Americans who will have an appropriate love for this country. And that's something that we need to foster starting, like I said, in 5th grade even, and on up through our universities. And so I'm excited we're doing that at Black Hills State. If your child is 18 and looking a place to go to college, think of Black Hills State, because we stood that up there and it's a great experience for them.
We'll continue with that a little bit, and that is we have 4th graders from Madison, South Dakota that come to us, and they write letters to the different legislators, and they work with us. And then also there's a group from Groton, South Dakota that is in the 8th grade that contacts many legislators about different bills. Why did you vote this way on this bill? And we have the pages and the interns. These are great opportunities for people to be involved. But before I go on, I want to mention that Representative or Majority Leader Scott is a great guy. I made a mistake, and he told me he didn't tell all you, but I'll tell all you, and that is when I said the special session is only done by the governor. That's partially true. It's also done by a 2/3 vote by both houses. Is that correct? So it can be done other than just by the governor. And the nice thing about Scott Oderbach, when he's working with his people, he's not trying to make them look bad. He's trying to make things get done the right ways. And I appreciate him. Thank you.
Senator Smith.
Thank you. As a former teacher myself, and a person, first of all, when I was in school, I remember, my civics and government teacher well. It was something I really enjoyed. I mean, that was a class I enjoyed. Not everybody does. I understand that. But I think it's our responsibility as educators. And first of all, I want to thank all of our teachers out there that do an incredible job, because it's not easy. And we know that. It's a hard job. But it's so important, and I believe it's amazing. My wife is a teacher now, and one of the things she just got done doing at Edison Middle School is they had student council elections this week in the middle school. And it is time. She's a student council advisor, and those kids are already learning. And one thing she does is she brings leaders in from the community to talk to these people. And I was talking to the Chief Justice earlier about mentorship and things like that. And when we can show kids that they can be a part of this, Representative Tyler Tortzen just spoke to a group of people who had an international conference this last week, and he talked about how he was brought to the Capitol about in 4th grade by his class, but he'd made contact with the representative, I believe, or senator from his district. That person became his mentor and set him on a career path because of that one interaction that he had when he was in elementary school. The power that each of us has out there as teachers, but not just teachers, legislators, judges, governors, the people sitting in this room, to change people's lives by showing them that there's an opportunity for them to take part in their government. It's a really cool story, you guys, but that's a responsibility not just on our teachers, not just on our lawmakers. It's a responsibility that all of us have as citizens of this great state to encourage and have people be a part of it, because ultimately it's not mine and it's not theirs, it's ours that we're working towards.
Before we wrap up with the executive branch on that, I want to note we are in our final 10 minutes already. This is too much fun. So we'll close that out and then move on to our next question. But Lieutenant Governor, please go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly, and it can be a little hard for me to gauge because civics is really government and history. It's understanding the history of our country, the underpinnings of it, and then how does our government work. I'm a history and political science major. I read and write about this stuff for fun. And so I'm more interested in it than the average person would be, and that's okay. Everyone needs to have a working knowledge of that, though. A couple years ago in South Dakota, we adopted new social studies standards. There's some controversy around that, and that's fine too. That's part of the process. What I would say, and now they're in place, they were very rigorous, and I've been paying attention. I always ask my kids, what are they doing in social studies? My kids are all in the Sioux Falls public schools, and they are getting the underpinning that they need to have to understand civics, history, and government. They're learning about the ancient Greeks. They're learning about why the Revolutionary War happened. They're learning to label all the major rivers in the state. I mean, this is a good curriculum, and our schools, at least in Sioux Falls, are doing a very good job of teaching it. I've been very impressed. I would also say there are people who are more interested in that than others, but a great opportunity that we have in South Dakota for college students is to be part of the legislative intern program. And that is, there are many legislators who first got bitten by the bug by being part of the legislative intern program, and we continue to get good young people in that program, as far as I can tell, who are interested and who are wanting to be part of this process and who will go on to contribute in even larger ways. So I'm actually optimistic that, in South Dakota anyway, that civics is something that's still pretty front and center.
Chief Justice, briefly.
Yeah, so civic engagement, obviously our judges go out into schools, we go out into local community clubs and speak and talk about what we do, but one of the biggest forms of civic engagement we have in the court system happens every week when we call a jury, a pool of individual citizens who come in and sit and hear cases. And when we talk to the individuals that serve as jurors in the case, it's so eye-opening for them, because many times they've seen maybe a 30-second blurb on the news about a case or read about a case in the paper or online. And for them to actually get a whole glimpse of the system and see how the process works, it's amazing. And the other thing I would comment on that is we're really fortunate in South Dakota. We have about 90% of the people that we call as jurors show up. And that's a really good turnout. There's a lot of places where it's less than 50%. And so we're really fortunate that people understand their civic duty and their civic responsibility to serve as jurors. And most of them get a lot out of it when they do.
In our final 6 minutes, don't make me regret this, I have a question related to freedom of speech. And it's generally directed to all of our panelists. Of course, we can understand current events, bring this top of mind for a lot of people. So I think I might start with our legislators, executive, and with perhaps precedent from our judicial branch, and that will really wrap out our show tonight. But I'll go first to our lawmakers. How do you weigh the First Amendment right to freedom of speech in your duties as a legislator?
I say Jamie should go first this time.
You've been volunteered.
Freedom of speech is an essential and core value for all of us. We should be able to speak the truth, and you have the right to say things until your right to say things harms other people. Or we can't also yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't do certain things, and we limit that speech for certain reasons. Ultimately, though, just because you think you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you should. I think oftentimes that, if you're using hate speech, what are you trying to achieve through that? What is your goal, and what is the end all of what you're trying to do? I think we need to, as leaders, model speech that is constructive and appropriate, and I think we need to encourage others to do the same. And then the courts need to work through the process as they will as well.
In our final 5 minutes, would our Republicans like to say anything to this?
Well, certainly freedom of speech underpins what sets this country apart, and we've got to keep working to keep it that way. This last week, we were all shocked to the core as a nation. A great American and a martyr named Charlie Kirk gave his life for freedom of speech, in my opinion. He dedicated his life to going to college campuses and contending for the truth, contending for the Christian faith. And now he will serve as an example for millions more. And he does for me. He's an inspiration. He was before he died, and he is now. And it's that kind of example that we should all strive to emulate. What did he do? But he went right into places that historically hadn't necessarily been as open to free speech maybe as they should have for his point of view. And he took great joy into wading right into that debate and being kind to people, being firm, giving his point of view, hearing all sides. And we can't let that die with him. We need to build on that.
Briefly, the executive branch thoughts on the First Amendment and freedom of speech specifically.
Well, I agree with Senator or Representative Odenbach. This was a huge wake-up call this week that our nation went through. And in my inaugural address 7 months ago, I talked about civility and transparency, and I think this was a stark reminder of just how far off course our nation has gotten. But I also believe that South Dakota has another opportunity to be an example to the nation. And we're going to take advantage of our resources. And I've already started conversations with our Board of Regents about, instead of locking down our universities like we hear on the national news that others are considering doing, that we encourage a program that we invite speakers to promote civil discourse with opposing views that can disagree agreeably, and set a policy that will be an example to our students at our universities and to our state and to a nation. And I think that South Dakota is a place where that could start, because we've proven that we'll step up and we're not afraid to swim upstream on issues that seem insurmountable.
Judicial branch, about a minute on the First Amendment.
Yeah, what I would say, one of the things that separates us as a country, we have many of the same free speech rights in our Constitution that they have in the Russian Constitution, the North Korean Constitution, and the Chinese Constitution. But what sets us apart is that we have an independent judiciary, that even reprehensible speech, we recognize that people have the right to do that in this country and have the right to give their speech. So it's not just something on a piece of paper, it's something that we recognize as the very foundation and fabric of our society.
That will have to wrap up our questions for this evening, and we'll have to close. I want to thank every one of our panelists for joining us tonight and for the illuminating conversation and the civil conversation. I think it was really a service to our viewers and to the people of South Dakota. A final thank you as well to our partners tonight from SDPB, South Dakota Newswatch, Kevin Kilo here with me moderating tonight, the League of Women Voters of South Dakota, some of whom are also here tonight, and the Cheeseman Center for Democracy at the University of South Dakota. And before we leave, a quick preview of some upcoming events in the Civics and Media series. Wednesday, September 24th from 6 to 7 p.m. Central Time at USD's Al Newharth Media Center in Vermillion. Julia Helweg, director of the Cheeseman Center and USD Associate Professor in Political Science, will give an overview of the state of democracy and people's perceptions of it using South Dakota poll results and national research. Monday, September 29th, from 6 to 7:15 p.m. Central Time at the Brookings Public Library. Reynold Nessebaugh, former state senator and professor of economics at Augustana University, will present his South Dakota Law Review article on whether recent legislation weakened the state's petition process. And Tuesday, September 30th, from 5 to 6:15 p.m. Mountain Time at the Hive in Rapid City, a presentation and Q&A on the changing landscape of civics and media by Kathy Johnson, President-elect of the League of Women Voters of South Dakota, and Carson Walker, CEO of South Dakota Newswatch. And that's just this month. But until then, on behalf of all of us here tonight, we want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.